Good evening, my name is Eduardo Ramalho. I am 41 years old, born and raised in Cascavel, in the state of Ceará. My father was known to everyone as Seu Ramalho, a man who toiled his whole life as a bricklayer and who greatly enjoyed a swim in the sea. He worked in various parts of the metropolitan region of the state and also in the more rural areas. And from each of these places, he brought back a chilling story to tell. He always harbored a curiosity for these subjects because as a boy, he listened to countless of these tales narrated by the elders and ended up experiencing his own stories. As he grew up, he would spend weeks on end working away from home, and when he returned, he invariably had something to recount, especially about a creature concerning which the people here in Ceará weave various narratives, the notorious werewolf. I will now leave you with the voice of Seu Ramalho, and just as I once listened, you will now listen. On one occasion, I was erecting one of those large houses with 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and surrounded by a porch, full of windows and with ample space. It was a job for many months there in the Crato region. The owner of the construction was a politician, and his brother owned a bar that sold food. It was there that I and the others would go for lunch and dinner. People from all over came there to eat and drink the broth that he prepared. Seu Mariano was his name. One night after supper, he offered us some pieces of meat that were roasting, and we savored them with cachaça before retiring. The house where we were staying was in front of his bar, and we sat on a chair on the sidewalk where he began to discourse about happenings there. Between one subject and another, Seu Mariano told of the night he discovered that a man transformed into a werewolf, and those present began to laugh, claiming that the liquor he was drinking was already taking effect. But he settled himself on the stool and began to narrate. I will tell you how I found out. One day, I started courting a girl who resided after the school down this street. Her father was exceedingly irascible, and I didn't go there much, perhaps, once or twice a week, and that was rare. Nearby lived a town acquaintance, a drunkard named Valdeci, who dwelled in a shack surrounded by undergrowth. Whenever I went to visit this girl, he would stand at the window of his shack watching me. I would pass by around the early evening, and he invariably asked what time I would return, as he would leave a light on in front of the house to guide me in the darkness of the entire road. I found this concern odd, as I only knew him by sight. And as the saying goes, when the arms are great, even the saint suspects. One late afternoon, I left the house and took the road. Already near the dwelling of this Valdeci, I imagined he would be at the window. It was then that suddenly he jumped over a fence almost on top of me and began to guffaw. I was so startled that I almost fell, and he found it amusing. I left without saying anything, and he stood there staring at me and laughing. I returned from the girl's house around 9 at night and thought it better not to follow the usual road. I went around through a small farm and came out on the other side, on a road further ahead, just so as not to pass in front of the house of the wretch who was making fun of me. I did this for a few weeks and had no more problems. The inconvenience was that on the way back, I would jump over 2 fences and have to walk through a thicket, but I felt no fear. However, sometimes I would cut myself on thin branches, and there was also the risk that others would see me leaving the property and might have wrong impressions of me. Until one late afternoon, I was going to this girl's house, and I spotted the said Valdeci standing in front of his shack. Before I could utter a word, he already inquired, "You're coming back late from there, huh? I haven't seen you coming back in ages." I confirmed that yes, I was returning late. I felt like telling him a few truths, but on that deserted road and without a stick to defend myself, I thought it better to remain silent and continue on my way. When I finally turned my back on him, the scoundrel said, "Be careful with the wire on the fence so you don't cut yourself." At that instant, I felt a chill and such an unpleasant sensation that even my gait changed. I arrived at the girl's house and related what was happening. The poor thing was more frightened than I was, as she would have to return alone, and she spoke with her father and brother to accompany me on the way back. And so it remained. Every time I went to see her, I returned with her father and brother. When the time of the church festivals arrived, I was selling food, and whoever came to buy something from me only mentioned the same subject, about a beast that was running along the roads, jumping over low fences and devouring chickens. Rumors had it that this creature had even tried to invade a house where there was a pregnant woman, and only didn't enter because the woman's husband unloaded buckshot on the beast. They recounted that the owner of this house saw when the animal moved away, and he swears that it was half man and half animal, a foul-smelling beast like a boar that wallows in its own filth. When the people began to leave, I packed my things to go too, and on the way, I see the said Valdeci sitting on the stone curb, his button-down shirt open, drunk and all dirty. The moment he sees me, he starts laughing and says, "Only walking with company now, huh? I see you, you know. I see everything." The scoundrel then got up and staggered down the road. May the devil take him. In the following days, I even stopped passing by the house of this wretch who lived mocking me on my way there, and I began to take my old way back also on the way there, since I was returning with my father-in-law and his son. Only on this day, I ended up going a little later, and it was already night when I took my shortcut. This land I was crossing had a fence that separated a small farm from a property I didn't know who owned, but it was very large and full of trees and undergrowth. At the foot of this fence was a trail, and that's where I was walking. You just had to follow this fence until the road on the other side. It was quick. In a matter of minutes you could do it. I just wasn't counting on what was already waiting for me at the beginning of that night. I jumped over the first fence and only heard that cracking of undergrowth and a growl like a pig coming towards me. I only had time to turn around and put my foot on the fence and my hand on the post to get leverage and jump to the other side. When I jumped, I fell to the ground and only saw that beast standing, holding onto the fence and shaking it forcefully. I thought it was the devil himself, who had come from hell just to get me. If I say anything that resembles what I saw, I will be lying, because there is nothing to compare it to or that looks like it. It was a completely deformed beast, full of tufts of hair on its body. Some parts had hair and others didn't. The head was a mixture of a dog and a pig, with the arms of a man. The beast shook the wooden post of the fence until it splintered, and I got up and ran screaming to the house that was inside the fenced property. That's when I saw the lights turn on, and I screamed even louder for help. 2 men came out of there and told me to stop screaming and raise my hands. I said there was a beast trying to kill me, and they heard the crackling of the fence being broken. Then the beast came in, and they also saw the same thing I did. We ran inside the house and saw that abomination running until it got tired and left the way it had come in. Nothing would make me leave that house until dawn, and when the sun rose, we saw how the fence had been, and the owner of the property couldn't believe the strength that thing had, because it not only broke the posts, but also tore them out of the ground. After what happened, I continued going to this girl's house during the day and once a week, because everyone was frightened by my story. Several days passed. It was a Sunday morning, and I was walking down the road, and I see the said Valdeci sitting in front of his shack smoking, and when I passed by, he says, "Got scared, boy?" I looked and asked, "Scared of what?" "Of dying," he replied. At that moment, I felt like my legs weighed 200 kilos. I stopped and stood looking at the man in front of me, not knowing what to do. And then he got up and went into his shack saying, "I just wanted to scare you. If I had wanted to kill you, it would have been easy." He then locked himself in the shack, and I stood there for a while until I managed to move. Until then, I hadn't realized that the beast I had seen could be a werewolf. For me, it was anything else, a demon or even the devil who had come after me. but it was a werewolf, and the one who transformed was this Valdeci. Several years passed. I had never said that I knew it was him who turned into a beast. But there were people who ended up finding out too. They even saw him transform, but he never left. He lived in the shack until he died. After he died, I never heard any more stories about werewolves in that region. But that doesn't mean they don't exist out there anymore. Another place where I worked and heard another story about a werewolf was in the municipality of Itapiúna. There, I worked on the construction of a warehouse and already had some acquaintances. So, that job was quite peaceful. A man named Vieira worked with us, a very tall and very talkative gentleman. As the days went by, I became very friendly with him, and one weekend he invited me to see his house, which was a little further away from the urban area of Itapiúna. Very early on Sunday morning, I went with him, and he took me to one of those small houses full of plants around it and a lot of chickens and dogs on the property. We sat near a chiriguela tree and stayed there until I saw a lady coming from Mass, and it was Vieira's wife. Her name was Dona Maria Jose, and the three of us chatted for a good while. They lived alone there as their two sons were already married and had their own families. Only sometimes they would appear and bring their children to play on the property with the dogs. At lunchtime, I noticed that the house was very secure. It had bars on the windows and doors, on all of them, which is not very common for people who live in the interior of the state, because I have been to places where people slept with their windows open. It's quite common in the interior. Having bars on doors and windows is more for families who live in big cities because of violence. In a calm place like that, I found it strange. But Vieira said that it wasn't always like that and told me the story. One day, we arrived home and one of the windows was open, but we had left them all closed. At that time, we didn't have dogs to ward off strangers, so it must have been some thief. Luckily, my brother was with us that day, and we took some wooden slats and went slowly because the thief might still be inside the house. That's when we heard someone rummaging through everything inside, and I opened the door, but when he heard it, he tried to flee through the window he had entered, and my brother caught him and started whipping the scoundrel with a piece of wood. I ran and started hitting him too until he asked me to stop. Then he got up all bruised, and I said, "Don't ever come back here. If I catch you here in front or near this house, I'll break both your legs." The thief was a thin man with little hair and a poorly trimmed beard, all dirty with black feet, and he looked like he hadn't bathed for several days. If he was hungry, he just had to ask, and we would have given him something to eat. But breaking into my house to steal was a bit too much. But the thief didn't seem to learn his lesson, and when he was on the road, he shouted, "This won't stand! Mark my words!" My wife started feeling sick right away and said she didn't want to live here anymore, that the man would come back to take revenge, and that we were in great danger. But this was our house, so I had bars made and put them all over it. Only then did my wife feel safer, especially when I went to work. My brother brought a dog that was already a year old, and it quickly got used to us. And the months passed, and we put the thief's story aside, until one day I was in a bar after work, having a drink before going home. And the men who were there were telling a story that had happened the night before. They said that the watchman of a cattle farm was very ill in a hospital in the capital because he had fought with a man who was forcing his way into where the animals were kept. Since it was dark, he thought it was just any man, but when he got closer, he saw the man's eyes shining in the dark, and he jumped on the watchman and started fighting. The watchman himself told the story after he escaped from the beast and was waiting for the car to take him to the hospital. He said that the man had a lot of hair on his body, but looked like an animal. His arms were all scratched, and he only didn't die because he pulled out a knife and wounded the man who let him go and ran away. He couldn't say if it was a beast or a person, and told those who were there to be very careful at night. After hearing the story, I got on my bicycle and rode home quickly. It was almost night when I arrived, and my wife opened the door. I went in and she closed it. I was already taking off my clothes to take a bath when I heard her scream, and I ran to see what was wrong, and she was at the door all trembling, trying to put the keys in the lock. I asked her what was wrong, and she said, "There's something in the yard." I saw the eyes shining. At that moment I remembered the story I'd heard before arriving and armed myself, waiting for what would come. The dog was inside the house and stood in front of the door, growling as if it already knew that whatever was outside was not good. I went out, locking everything, and we heard something running around and sometimes scratching against the walls. Then we heard it run away, and I opened the window, and there on the road I saw a creature with black fur standing, with one hand resting on the fence. At that moment you don't want to believe it, you think it's a fisherman's tale, a legend and all that, but what I saw was a werewolf. Even today I find it strange to say that I saw such a thing, but that's what I saw, a werewolf. And I don't doubt that the one who transformed was the thief who tried to break in here. He only didn't get in because the house was full of bars, and even though my wife was alone, he couldn't do anything because she was safe. When dawn broke, we saw the beast's tracks on the ground, and the dog went out sniffing everything. We found an old shirt in the back of the property where there's a trail that leads to a small farm that belongs to a distant cousin of mine. I went there and told him what I had seen, and he said that he had also seen it, but just ran across the road because his dogs had chased the scoundrel away. There were many reports of this demon here and there, but here it never came back. I think the thief was the one who transformed, and on the day we beat him, he swore he would return, and he did, but in the form of a beast. That's why the bars remain to this day, even after so many years, because you never know when he might return. Good night.